So, we finally have it. We're finally at that point where we have all the information about the next gen consoles and everything they have to offer. Since pre-orders have started for the PS5 at least, I figured now would be a good time just to sum up everything and give my opinion on which console I think will win in this generation. So for this video, Google Stadia, the Switch, kind of operate in their own niche and have their own specific limitations. And also PC gaming is something entirely different, so none of those would be covered here. This is going to be reserved specifically for the OG Hatfields and McCoys of the console world. It's Xbox versus PlayStation. But without further ado, let's just jump into it. So, in order to know who'll win the next gen war, we first have to talk about who's been winning so far and why. And if you didn't know, well, that would honestly be surprising because it's without a doubt PlayStation. And to say that PlayStation has been beating Xbox is kind of like saying that Michael Jordan is just a good basketball player.
Stop it. Get some help.
Just to give you some numbers, the PS4 sold 108 million units in its lifetime, while the Xbox One only sold 46 million. So this wasn't close by any means. It was literally more than a 2-to-1 ratio. Heck, even the Switch, which was released 4 years after the Xbox One, currently has sold 52 million units. So something's definitely up. So where did it all go wrong for Xbox? Well, in all honesty, it wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of falling short at every opportunity. Because we know when Xbox does things right, it can compete with PlayStation. And this was seen in the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, whereby they were neck and neck with both consoles selling 77 million units, with PS3 only leading by 3,000. So obviously a much closer race, and Microsoft made some bad decisions in the current generation. But what exactly went wrong? So firstly, there was the price. Microsoft jumped the gun and released pricing for the Xbox One ahead of Sony at a $499 price point. And then PlayStation came in and chopped that by around 20% to $399 for the PlayStation 4. Now, these systems were pretty much identical from a technical and graphical standpoint, so there's no real edge to justify the Xbox price increase from the console alone. Yeah, sure, they threw in Microsoft Kinect, but that was pretty much junk because when's the last time anybody has heard anything of Kinect or the motion gaming or any of its latest advancements? Kinect would kind of become this one-trick pony where you'd show it off if people visit your house and say, this is motion gaming, and then proceed to play literally anything else. So trying to justify paying $100 more for just that doesn't really make too much sense. Then there was the performance. So yes, while I did say that the specs were pretty comparable, that was just on paper. In reality, the Xbox was much more inefficient at drawing power from its system because games were on average 5 to 10% slow on the Xbox, especially at launch, and they were just not as optimized. And speaking of games, the biggest reason that I personally chose the PS4 over the Xbox had to be the exclusives. Xbox does have some good exclusives such as Halo, Gears of War, Forza Motorsport, but I kinda struggle to think of any more than that. But PlayStation, on the other hand, well, they have the Uncharted series, The Last of Us, God of War, Bloodborne, Zero Dawn Horizon, Spider-Man, Final Fantasy, etc. Man, the list just keeps going on. And while Xbox exclusives are generally good games, PlayStation exclusives are more often than not Game of the Year contenders. I mean, to this day, The Last of Us is argued as possibly one of the best video games ever made. And if you owned an Xbox, you wouldn't even get the chance to experience that. So with the PlayStation having the better price, more efficient hardware, and better games, I'm honestly more surprised by the fact that Microsoft managed to get 46 million units sold, but I guess that's its brand power. So it kind of goes without saying that Microsoft had to step it up when it came up to the next generation. But did they? So from a concept perspective, both the PS5 and Xbox Series have two versions. PlayStation has a regular version and a digital version, and digital just meaning that it doesn't have a disk drive. Whereas Microsoft created the Series X and the Series S, with the Series S being kind of like a iPhone SE that no one really asked for. Now, I am personally biased because I think the Series S is a complete waste of R&D money, and I go over that in my previous video shown over here. So I have to give the overall concept to PlayStation. Design, on the other hand, I can't lie. I think that the Xbox Series X looks much better. I can't explain it, but the minimalist box just calls out to me more than PlayStation's design. It could be that every time I see the PlayStation 5, all I see is my modem. So for design, I would have to give it over to Xbox. And in terms of price, did Microsoft learn from its mistake of going first? No. Again, in 2020, they decided to go first and price the more powerful Series X at $499 USD and the Series S at $299 USD. And then, just like in similar fashion, PlayStation came around and priced the digital only edition at $399 and the regular version at $499. So once again, you can get the next gen PlayStation for a full $100 cheaper than the Xbox. Yeah, sure, you might be missing an optical drive, but assuming you have a half decent internet connection, that shouldn't really make a difference to you. So the obvious winner here is the PlayStation. And now on to the hardware. So we won't be talking much about the Series S here, because like I said, from a hardware standpoint, it's pretty weak, so it's not even worth comparing it over here. So looking specifically at the Series X, just like in the current generation, the specs are pretty comparable to the PS5, and from an on-paper standpoint, they shouldn't really result in any major performance differences. But the edge does have to go to the Series X, because while the PS5 looks to have a much better SSD speed, the Series X has a slightly faster CPU, a more powerful GPU, and potentially better utilization of that GPU with variable rate shading. Now, the CPU difference will likely be negligible, but the GPU performance does leave a bit of a gap for Xbox to outshine the PS5. With 16 more cores and 3 more teraflops, the potential for the Series X could be pretty significant. On the flip side, it could be argued that the PS5's SSD could result in some of the same speed differences with loading games that we've seen in previous years and recreate the feeling of a faster system that was seen in the PS4. But even with that, hardware-wise, I still have to give the edge to the Series X because it does have more potential with the GPU. At the end of the day though, I will say it is potential, and that doesn't mean it'll be realized, because will developers try to take full advantage of the GPU power with AAA titles, or will they just try to standardize it at the PS5 level? Only time can tell, but we can at least hope for Xbox exclusives to be developed to really push the GPU advantage to its limits. And speaking of exclusives, what do we potentially have coming our way for both consoles? Well, looking at the PS5, we have a new God of War, Horizon Forbidden West, the sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man with Miles Morales, Demon's Souls, Final Fantasy XVI, and from newer projects we have something called Project Athia, which looks to have a lot of potential from my perspective. And then in the Xbox corner, we have Halo Infinite, we finally have a Fable reboot, and then we have some newer games that look like they have a lot of potential, such as Everwild and Avowed, which looks to be Oblivion's challenge to the Elder Scrolls series. And it was announced that Microsoft purchased Bethesda and its parent company ZeniMax for $7.5 billion, and it now has full control over games like Fallout, the Elder Scrolls series, Wolfenstein, Doom, and more. So while we don't know what their plan is with these classics, whether to turn them into exclusives or not, it is a good sign that Microsoft is committing to building out its games and willing to drop billions in order to do so. Keeping this in mind, since we don't know what the plans for these games are, I still have to give the edge to PlayStation, just because they're building on a lot of established exclusives that have proven themselves, such as God of War and Spider-Man. And Xbox just seems to kind of be kickstarting their plans with the Bethesda purchase and Fable reboot, and games such as Everwild. But I do think that Xbox does have great potential to grow its exclusives now, but I just don't think it's there yet. And last up, we have something that didn't really factor too much in the current console war, and that was the value-added services, otherwise known as that extra edge or that X factor that each console should have over the other. In the current gen, it was meant to be motion gaming, with Microsoft having the Kinect, which was completely controller-free motion gaming, but that failed and is nowhere to be seen. So in the next gen, we have Microsoft come up with Game Pass. So Game Pass is essentially Xbox equivalent to PS Now. All in all, it's a subscription service allowing players to download games from current and previous gens and engage in one big nostalgia trip. Both Game Pass and PS Now are priced at $9.99 a month, so that's pretty competitive, and largely the differentiating factor comes down to what games you have access to. PS Now will have access to its classic PS exclusives, but those are only added after a few years after the games have been released. And there's also some access to non-exclusives, but that shows up on the Xbox. Game Pass, on the other hand, is taking a slightly different approach and releasing exclusives, or at least Microsoft Game Studio exclusives, the moment they launch. So this could really work to bring in that crowd that was looking at buying these games and then just getting them to save money by purchasing a subscription. This is just an interesting area because even though PS Now has been out for much longer, it hasn't really driven that much value or need. Like me, for example. I had it, I played a few games, and then I completely forgot about it once the trial was over. But Xbox's strategy means that they could be trying to really grow their gaming as a service feature and use this as an edge that PlayStation just currently doesn't have. So while I think the better exclusives are on PS Now, and I do like playing these older classics, Games Pass is building access to both older titles as well as the latest releases. So while it may not be as refined as PS Now, and will likely have to work out a lot of kinks as it grows and deals with user demand, I definitely think it has the potential, so I have to give the win over to Xbox for value-added services. And this brings us to the final decision. Has Microsoft done enough to make up for past mistakes? Are they ready to overtake Sony for the first time and become the leader of console gaming? Well, no. At least not yet. At the end of the day, money talks, and with the price of the Xbox Series X, money is probably going to walk. Xbox might be able to attract some new customers with the Series S, but as a whole, the digital edition of the PS5 deals a serious blow over to Xbox, allowing you to get unhindered next-gen graphics at a much cheaper price. So it's really hard to compete with that. Yes, the Xbox Series X is slightly more powerful, and yes, it does have potential with its streaming service and with the Bethesda purchase. But I don't think that's going to be enough right now to erode the PlayStation price, exclusive, and brand loyalty advantage that's been built up in the current generation. So ultimately, Sony will win again. But I think it's going to be a much closer race than in the current generation, assuming that Microsoft can deliver on their games. While I think that the Series S was a waste of time, and the research dollars could have been allocated to more exclusives, or even just bring the price down, I think overall Microsoft is showing that they're willing to experiment with new things to get ahead, instead of just copying PlayStation's model. And since they have the dollar backing of Microsoft, as seen by the $7.5 billion purchase, they should be able to get through enough failures to eventually find something good, or something worthwhile. But it just so happens that this isn't that time. But that's it for this video, guys. Let me know which console you'll be getting in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.